Later on today's episode of On the Other Hand,
Part of it is recognizing that when someone is exhibiting bullying behavior, it's not about you. It's about the need for control or the need for attention. It's not about anyone who's reading this who's in the LGBTQ community about their worth or their truth. It's about the bully's need for attention.
this is On the Other Hand. A podcast that features community leaders in Arkansas sharing their views and experiences on how to make Arkansas's relationships and communities better. Hello and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, Glenn White, and I'm here with my co-host, April Chatham Carpenter. On our podcast, April and I interview community leaders in Arkansas who in some way help work towards solutions across various political or other divides, or perhaps who have expertise in matters of interest to us, or that in some way work to make things better for Arkansans. So, April, who do we have with us today?
Well, Glenn, I'm very excited to have a friend of mine and colleague from UA Little Rock joining us today, Sharon Downs. And we asked her to come on today because we have had a specific issue come up in previous interviews about how to deal with difficult group situations when a person in the group is a bully. I know that in Braver Angels, we also have work and workshops that deal with those kinds of issues as well. Well, our guest today, Sharon Downs, has some specific expertise in this and related areas, which is what led us to reach out to her. She's currently the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at UA Little Rock with a focus on wellness and inclusion. She served for many years as the director of the Disability Resource Center at UA Little Rock as well. And she's also a certified group facilitator with the Arkansas Public Administration Consortium called APAC. So welcome to On the Other Hand, Sharon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So Sharon, fill us in a little bit on any parts of your biography that we may have missed that you'd like our listeners to know about.
Sure thing. Thank you so much, Glenn and April, for this opportunity. I do want to start by saying that I am here today in my personal capacity. I will be probably reaching to some of my experience here at UA Little Rock, but I'm here in my personal capacity. Parts of my biography you may have missed. Well, I guess probably the thing to know about me is I'm one of those odd people who loves diving into difficult conversations with people. I gravitate toward that, not away from it. And maybe it's because I'm an INFJ on the Myers-Briggs, I don't know. But I really like getting into uncomfortable spaces with people and figure out how to find mutual connections that make it harder to be in conflict with folks. And this topic is a little close to my heart. I've had a couple of bullying experiences in my life. One with a family member and one professionally. And I will say that I wasn't as equipped to deal with those at the time as I am now. And so I'm happy to share anything that I've picked up over the years to help others with this issue, because it's a tough issue.
It absolutely is a tough issue. And thank you also for acknowledging that you're here in your personal capacity. I am as well. This is not a representation of my department or my work at UA Little Rock, although it certainly flows from my expertise in areas of communication. So I think we both have that in common. So I know that you have had background and your current work and personal experiences certainly have led you to learn some sound strategies for dealing with bullying behavior. So tell us a little bit about that background that has brought you to where you feel more comfortable today in dealing with that kind of behavior.
Absolutely. Thank you. A big part of my identity for the last 25 or 30 years has been as an ally to the LGBTQ plus community. And I came there from a few roots, some personal experiences and some professional experiences. I should say that I identify as cis-het, which means I'm cisgender, heterosexual, cisgender meaning not transgender. So I don't have personal lived experience with the LGBTQ community, but I have worked closely with the community as an ally for a long time. And boy, talk about bullying behavior. That is a population that gets it hard, and they're getting it hard in so many areas, including on the national political and policy and the state political and policy areas. I'm sure we'll be talking more about that. So one of the things that probably my proudest professional achievement is setting up safe zone training on campus. It's been almost 11 years since the committee set this up, and it's essentially a 4-hour training that is offered to employees of the university, faculty and staff, to teach them about issues the LGBTQ plus community faces, and also very specific hands-on experience in how to be an ally. And the most popular part of that training is always the panel discussion. So we have a panel of LGBTQ folks, and they get to tell their stories. And there are a lot of examples of bullying. So I feel like I've learned a lot over the last 10 years, if for no other area in my life than from these safe zone trainings.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I first came to campus here and went through that, and I learned so much, even as a conservative, and knowing I didn't even know the language things to talk about or how to talk about, because I knew that I would potentially have students and faculty and staff that I would be dealing with. So I thought it was important for me to gain some knowledge and skills. So thank you for the work that you've been doing there.
Thank you.
So Sharon, you kind of alluded to this when you're talking about the LGBTQ plus population being very vulnerable to bullying. That is true, and probably always has been true. It's certainly true now in our society that we've become so politically polarized that there are multiple additional opportunities for people to be tempted into bullying or other aggressive or difficult behaviors just because somebody has a different view from them. So I wonder if I'm sure you've thought about this, and I wonder what kind of specific recommendations you might have for dealing with that kind of problematic, bullying type behavior arising from our politically polarized environment these days.
I follow this wonderful influencer, and his name is Jefferson Fisher. He's on social media. He is actually a trial attorney in Texas, but he teaches so many great tips on how to have productive conversations. His tagline is something like, how to make your next conversation the one that changes everything. And so I get a lot of my tips, very specific tips from him. And he is a real advocate for not reacting, but kind of taking control of your own response, replying in a very measured, slow, deliberate way, to not give a reaction, which is often what bullies want. They want a reaction. That's one reason they bully. So one thing to do would be, if someone were to say something bullying to me, then I would just look at them and say, "Are you okay?" Which really shifts the focus on their behavior being not okay, and not so much on me and my reaction. And it, again, has that added benefit of not giving them the satisfaction of me responding in a reactive kind of way. Or just to ask them to repeat what they said. If somebody said something really rude to you, then just say, "I'm sorry, would you mind saying that one more time just to make sure I heard you right?" Again, it makes the focus go back on them. You can also ask questions of intent, like, "Did you mean to embarrass me? Were you trying to upset me or hurt me with that comment?" And that gives them a mirror into the consequences of their behavior. And I've never used this one, but I like it. I don't know why I've never felt brave enough to use it, but if someone says something to you that's bullying, just to say to them, "Did you say that for attention or due to being insecure?" It'll make them think twice before saying something like that again. And one day, I've got that in my pocket. One day I plan to use that. But those are all ways in which I'm not giving my power to the bully. I'm putting the focus back on them and their bad behavior.
Very good. I like that. That's interesting. Um, in I'm retired now, but in my former field of psychology, we did a lot with dealing with social issues and problems. And one of the go-to strategies we suggested for people who are having problems with social aggression is to exercise assertiveness skills. And as I'm sure you know, assertiveness is kind of that fine midpoint between aggression and passivity. It's we're not trying to hurt other people or violate other people's rights, but we're also being clear and standing up for our own rights. So I wonder what your assessment might be of those types of strategies for dealing with bullying using assertiveness approach, or if you have other approaches you think might go beyond just asserting oneself that would be helpful.
I think for some people, that's absolutely the way to go. I do think that's one of the areas where we can't prescribe it for everyone, because for some people that will not resonate, or they just will feel perhaps more vulnerable in being assertive, maybe putting themselves more at risk by being on the bully's radar in that way. I think a big consideration is, what is the relationship between you and the person who's bullying you? And so then you can identify, what are your goals for that interaction. If this is your brother, for instance, and that relationship's important to you, but they've said something that you could identify, that anyone would identify as bullying, you've got to think about, what is my goal for this interaction? Do I want to burn down all the bridges and not worry about the relationship, or do I value the relationship and I need to figure out a way to respond in such a way that will enhance that back and forth communication, still communicating my needs, but trying to get to mutual understanding and respect instead of just trying to shut down their problematic behavior. You've also really got to think about the power dynamics at play and what repercussions there may be of your actions. So if you're experiencing bullying at work, what is that person's relationship to you in terms of power differential? Because that's going to have an enormous impact on how willing I'm going to be assertive versus finding some other way to manage the situation. For instance, if there's another witness to the bullying, later going and asking them if they could help you problem solve, or maybe they're in a better position power-wise to intervene on your behalf. So I think there are a lot of considerations to determine how you want to proceed.
Yeah, I can see that. One of the things that is recommended when you're being assertive is trying to make sure you're aware of not purposefully being kind of nasty or harming or aggressive to the other person, but just simply being honest about your feelings. What you just said, I experienced as hurtful or disrespectful. I don't know if you meant it that way, but I felt that I'd appreciate it if you'd be a little more careful about that, or a million different variations, that kind of thing, which can still be seen as respectful, and yet calling someone out in a careful, subtle sort of way. And in addition to assertiveness, another thing that comes up in my mind when I think about bullying behavior is the impact of group dynamics and kind of social psychology on that kind of behavior. We know there's a long body of research on things about bystander effect and social modeling. One of the things that April and I were talking about briefly on another one was social proof. And it's the idea that our behavior can be influenced by how we see other people act. So a person who might or might not be a bully, if they see it around them and other people, that models for them and says it's okay. Now, it can work both ways. It can be both positive and negative. So I wonder what your thoughts are about how people who witness bullying behavior often fail to intervene in support of the victim, or how they can best respond to discourage that negative behavior.
Yes, the bystander effect. I was hoping you would bring that up. The bystander effect is it's just endemic. It affects everyone. It basically means that people are less likely to help when they're in a group than when they are by themselves. So if you see an incident happening and you are one of 10 people witnessing it, you are less likely to call 911 than if you're the only one witnessing it. And there are several reasons for that. One is called diffusion of responsibility. And again, that's the greater the number of people present, the less likely I may intervene because I feel like somebody else is in charge or someone else is going to handle this. And if you feel like someone else is going to handle the situation, you don't have a need to intervene. Or maybe this person is in a higher position at this institution than me, and they saw it and they're not doing anything. And that really becomes more about the second type, which is conformity. People's beliefs and behaviors being informed by others, either subtly or with direct pressure. So how much a person feels that level of conformity really is determined by a lot of factors, like how big is the group? What is my status in this group? What is public opinion on this topic in this group? People also tend to generally underestimate the extent of other people's concerns. There's a study where they had people in a lab and they had smoke. They were just waiting for the experiment to start, and smoke started coming in under the door, and they all just kind of looked at each other and were like, and later they were debriefed, and it's like, well, nobody else seemed concerned, so. And then finally, one person, opened the door and was like, hey, do y'all see there's smoke? But it took way longer than it should have because they had that kind of peer pressure of this is okay, everything's fine. A third issue that comes in bystander intervention is ambiguity. And that's where if it's unclear if it's an emergency or even a problem. And then we talked about the power dynamic. So those are all issues related to the bystander effect. There are so many things that we are even aware going on in our head that we're filtering all of these experiences through that are going to make us either want to intervene or think, I don't need to intervene.
Yeah, I can see there are a lot of things that will impact your decision to intervene. I guess I might ask you, can you have any specific recommendations to people about what they think going forward? Because they may be facing the potential of being vulnerable to a bystander effect. What's maybe a good rule of thumb or some consideration for people to think about when they're maybe facing something like that?
The first step is understanding that that people have that inclination. You see people walk right by someone who's asleep on the street without checking on them because everyone else is. So, but again, it's the whole issue of you're not even aware of how you're being influenced. So I think just that public education is very important. And then also, if I try to appeal to people's sense of personal safety and putting yourself in that person's shoes. If you see someone being bullied, instead of thinking no one else is intervening, so I shouldn't, think, okay, if that were happening to me, would I want someone to help me? Of course I would. So I think taking the other person's perspective can be very helpful. And I'd like to talk at some point about the different ways to intervene, because I think people assume intervening means you have to put yourself bodily in a situation where you might be put in danger, but there's so many other ways to intervene that can be very effective without putting yourself at risk.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead? Yeah, tell us a little more about some of those ways to intervene.
Yeah, absolutely. So right2be.org is a great resource. They used to be called Hollaback, but right2be.org, they developed the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, and it gives guidance on the many ways that any of us can intervene depending on the situation. The first one is the direct method, and that's the one that everyone thinks bystander intervention means. It's like I have to go and physically put myself in this situation to defuse it. And that sometimes is very appropriate and sometimes very needed, but that is only one of several. Distract is another one, and that's my superpower, and I didn't even know it was my superpower until I learned all this information. But basically diverting the attention of people who are involved. So if you see a couple in a bar and the argument's getting heated and one person looks scared of the other, to just I mean, one thing I would do is just, walk by and then like trip and knock something off on their table and say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Let me get you some napkins. Interrupting that behavior. And I'm naturally clumsy, so it works well for me. An example that we do in our bystander intervention training on campus is, like saying, hey, we need you for a TikTok video. Come dance with us, and grabbing one of them. Um, Another thing that I have done is to go up in that situation, go up to someone who I do not know. If the woman looks like she's being intimidated or she's afraid, just to go up and say, I can't believe I see you now after all these years. How long has it been? And give them a hug. And again, the aggressor is completely derailed. So that's distract. Delay is another one. And that one basically is when after the situation, you delay your response and you circle back to the target of the aggression and just check in with them. I am so I saw what happened. Is there anything I can do to support you? How can I be helpful to you right now? And then document. And this is the one that everyone does automatically. Everybody pulls out their phone to catch video, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but if you do document a situation like that, what you do with that video though is afterwards you go to the target of the aggression and say, I have this video. Do you want me to share it with you so you can give it to the police? Do you want me to give it to the police? Understanding that it does not belong to you at that point, it belongs to the target. So all of those are different ways that we can intervene, and all but the first one are physically very safe to do, but can have a huge impact.
So thank you for that information. One of the distinctions that I've heard about is a distinction between a bystander and an upstander. And I don't know if you see a distinction between those, or if you make a distinction in your training, and if so, but if you do, how would you describe those two roles?
I don't, in the bystander intervention training that we do, we don't really use the word upstander, but I do kind of understand the distinction that is used in discourse, public discourse. So often bystander does have that vibe of being very passive and not involved, a passive observer of whatever's happening. And upstander is someone who's willing to take some of these tools that we're talking about and utilize them to benefit someone who's being targeted. We continue to use the word bystander because so much of the literature is about enabling active bystanders or helpful bystanders. So I think that would be the distinction. What we're trying to do in our training is to reframe bystander as something that's passive to something that's very, very active. Like with, often you'll see videos of police interactions with folks. You'll have multiple approaches. You'll have someone who's, directly calling out for, in this instance, the police to stop putting physical pressure on a person who's obviously not fighting back. You have someone who's recording. You have someone who's calling for help. You have all different ways to respond. All of those are ways to be an active, helpful bystander.
That's really talking about situations in which there are groups, I think, of people involved. So we have kind of choices, right, of what we're going to do. I think about other situations that are maybe more relationship based, in which we sometimes have a decision to make. And I've seen and I use in my classes the distinction between calling in versus calling out. And, oftentimes we'll use Daryl Davis as an example of this, who is, an African-American man who actually went in and befriended people in the Ku Klux Klan to kind of build relationships there. And that's not everybody's strategy. When we see behavior that we think needs to be changed or that might be hurting another person. But I'm wondering what you think about the distinction. How do we make a decision about calling in versus calling out?
They're both needed. in different situations. Calling out has a much more of a negative connotation, but it is needed in some situations. If your primary goal is accountability and public awareness, calling out may be the way that you go. Naming that harmful behavior in a direct and public way, it interrupts the harm. It signals that these actions are not acceptable, and it may prevent further injury. It also, the big thing is it educates other people. I know you were talking about one-on-one, but if anyone is around, it educates other people in reinforcing what are the community norms about this issue and pointing out that this is outside of our community norm. And it's especially, calling out, I think, is especially important when it's a person who's in a position of power. And they're perpetuating harm, and if private efforts to address this have gone unheeded, calling out may be necessary. So for instance, if a peer of mine was doing some behavior and I've addressed it privately with that person and it continues, calling out might be completely appropriate. The emphasis there is on disrupting the behavior and having visibility, which can help create maybe institutional change. Calling in is much more of my vibe, though, again, as an INFJ, because it's focused on growth and relationship building. And the goal is to bring someone into a deeper understanding, to bring them into your circle rather than pushing them out. So approaching the person with empathy and curiosity. And often that's in a private situation. So for instance, if you're in a board meeting and someone says something that really needs to be addressed, I could make the choice to call it out in front of everyone, or after the meeting, I could pull them aside and say, listen, you made this comment and I feel very uncomfortable because I know that it could have this impact on this population of people. And you may not even be aware that that was the impact of what you were saying. I know it wasn't your intent because I know you and you have such a good heart, but it could be the impact. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Again, the emphasis there is on transformation and inclusion. And so I think that has so much more power in terms of avoiding behaviors in the future. Sometimes I think calling out makes people dig in deeper in their behaviors because they're stubborn.
I think about this sometimes also in the social media realm, in which a post happens, and you might not even know that, but that person that posted that, but a friend of yours posted it. And then all of a sudden you feel the need to actually say something publicly about that post. And then all of a sudden a fight is happening between you and the other people in this list of posts that are happening. And I don't know, if that's actually bullying in the same sense of what we've been talking about, but it certainly is negative behavior towards others that are happening, and maybe not something that we would do if we were face to face with them. We might not be having that kind of conversation. So I'm curious about what strategies, when we're in the social media environment, that you've talked about the bystander and the 4Ds and sometimes we choices of calling out versus calling in, but what choices and strategies do we have when we're seeing things happening in social media?
I think the impulse is the same, to react, like we talked about earlier. React immediately without thinking and just put all your thoughts out and without using much of a filter. And it's the same with being online. We have that immediate need to say, wait a minute, I'm not going to let this go unaddressed. And that's almost never helpful. People's minds are not changed when we call them out on social media. And often it escalates things in a really, really unhelpful way, because then they feel defensive. They've got, their family and friends who can see the comment, and they're not going to let that sit without addressing it. All that to say, people who post something that's very hurtful, that I feel is very hurtful, I will often respond anyway. I don't react, but I do respond. And I understand that statistically, I am not going to change the poster's mind. I'm not going to change their mind about anything that they said. But I do it to provide a different perspective to everyone who is reading the interactions. Because I think what happens is that person's all of their friends read that and jump in, or they just assume, oh, this is how everyone feels because no one is saying anything to contradict it. So often I will jump in and give a different perspective for anyone who might be reading the post, because we all live in echo chambers anymore, and we don't often hear dissenting voices on important issues. So, for instance, if a family member posted about, for instance, LGBTQ people presenting a danger to others in the bathroom, I'm going to post and just say something like, it is scary to think about our child being in a bathroom and we can't be there to protect them. I completely understand that instinct. But all of the literature shows that LGBTQ people are the victims in these incidents and almost never or never the perpetrator. That is a false narrative. And so I understand your instinct, but I don't think that it applies in this situation.
Great response. In the moment of the anger or the hijack of our brain to kind of feeling angry or wanting to react, we often react though, and we don't respond. How do you get from I want to react, I can't believe that person just said that, to the response that's more reasoned like you just had?
I have a lot of experience doing that. It comes naturally to me. It does not come naturally to a lot of folks. And so I think it's a skill that it's a muscle you have to work and practice. I think it's good to be an example to other people, because when people see it, they recognize what it is. Oh, if you know me at all, you know that that's going to get my hackles up. Talking about the LGBTQ population and vilifying them, that's going to get my hackles up more than anything. And so when you see a measured response that's thoughtful, that's an example to anyone who knows me of, I chose to do this. I chose to take a breath and think, how can I respond in a way that's helpful versus blasting them, which is what, of course, I want to do. And so I think it's good to have that example. There are other things, though, that I failed to mention. Part of it is recognizing that when someone is exhibiting bullying behavior, it's not about you. It's about the need for control or the need for attention. It's not about anyone who's reading this, who's in the LGBTQ community, about their worth or their truth. It's about the bully's need for attention and control of the narrative. So one thing that you could do is if you don't want to be the one who gives a measured, thoughtful response, is take screenshots. Block that individual from your social channels. Report the abuse through the platform. And then maybe consider adjusting your privacy settings so that you control better who's seeing what you post, and certainly who can post on your timeline, for instance, to tighten up those controls a little bit so that you're protecting yourself better.
Well, that's it for the first part of April and Glenn's conversation with Sharon Downs. We'll continue this conversation in the next episode, so be sure to check out part 2. And remember that our podcast offers dozens of other interviews like this one. You can find our On the Other Hand podcast inside your favorite podcast app or on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website at arkansas.braverangels.org.
Thanks for joining us on today's edition of On the Other Hand. This was the first part of our conversation with Sharon Downs. On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, April Chatham Carpenter
and Glenn White.
Join us in working to make our relationships and communities better.